Colleagues, we cannot hear the video audio. Will I get a cue? Will I get a countdown from the video? I just need to get a cue, 10 seconds to count down for when the video is finishing. The national anthem of Jamaica always makes me smile. The Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, Deputy Prime Minister of Jamaica and Minister of National Security, Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Mr. Courtney Rattray, United Nations Under-Secretary General, High Representative for Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries and Small Island Developing States, Dr. Gary Connell, United Nations Resident Coordinator, Ms. Therese Turner-Jones, Country Representative for Jamaica and General Manager, Caribbean Country Group, IDB, other members of the Diplomatic Corps, to Ms. Barbara Scott, Deputy Director General, External Cooperation Management and Project Development, Planning Institute of Jamaica, Mr. John Biles, OD, recently minted OD, Vice President of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. Congratulations, sir. Mr. Abraham Simmons, National Coordinator, Governor General's Program for Excellence, public and private sectors, governmental organizations, civil society organizations, academia, attendees, members of the media, and a special welcome and thank you to our sign language interpreters, Denku Wedderburn and Antoinette Tony Aiken. We welcome our deaf community members. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you might be tuning in from. Welcome to the 2021 UN Week Partnership Forum under the theme, Partnerships for Peace, Planet, and Prosperity. I'm Dr. Terry Carell Reid, and I am pleased to be your host for day one of this 3-day forum. Now, I bring you warm greetings from my beautiful island of Jamaica, so please don't be shy. Go ahead and let me know where you are viewing from. If you are viewing from Jamaica, please let me know what parish, what town, what district that you are viewing from. And if you are watching this and if you're joining us outside of Jamaica, please go ahead and let us know where you are viewing from. You can drop your emojis, drop your flags, let us know so that we can celebrate with you. Now, speaking of celebration, I could not possibly start off without congratulating the United Nations on 76 years, I believe, and I'm going to say of service. That is certainly no easy feat for any organization to achieve such a milestone. And it is a reflection and a representation of the stewardship, the leadership, the power of collaboration and volunteerism that happens within the United Nations. I'm very pleased that Jamaica has been a member since 1962. Now, for those of you who might not be aware, the official UN Day is October the 24th, and I hope you'll be able to grab your supplement, which will be available on October 24th in the Gleaner. But the very ambitious UN Jamaica team thought it would be really cool to have a week-long celebration and to have activities. Now, as a citizen, I just want to take the opportunity to thank the United Nations and United Nations office in Jamaica for the incredible work that they have been doing, especially with the support to COVID-19 response and recovery. $5 million mobilized, and that is the power of collaboration and partnership, and that is something that we will dive deeper and we will speak about much later on. So just as a matter of housekeeping before we jump in, thank you for registering if you're watching via VFAIR's platform, highly interactive platform. Always go to the auditorium to enter your sessions. These sessions are highly interactive, so you can go ahead, you can comment in the chat, but if you have your questions, please use the question and answer chat. Now, for those of you who are still, in your social media zone and that's where you want to stay, no problem, but we want to hear from you. So go ahead and submit your questions using the hashtag UNDay hashtag UN Jamaica so that we can see your questions and we can ask our panelists and our speakers. We want to remind those of you who are on the VFAIR's platform that we will launch a poll at the end of the sessions because we value your feedback and we're always looking to serve you better. So thank you so very much for watching across YouTube, Facebook, VFAIR's, PBCJ. It is a pleasure to have you. We cannot wait to hear from our amazing panelists as well as speakers as we speak more about these partnerships for peace, planet, and prosperity. Now, the best person, we could not have asked for a better person to really open us up with the opening remarks and the welcome than Dr. Gary Connell, Resident Coordinator, United Nations, Jamaica. Please make him welcome.
Thank you for these very kind words, Terry Carrell. I'm happy to have the honor to deliver the opening remarks for the UN Jamaica's 2021 Virtual Partnership Forum. Good morning, everyone. I am happy to have you all here. I am especially honored to welcome the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Security, who will be here with us today. I'm also extremely honored to welcome the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Let me also recognize Mrs. Barbara Scott, Deputy Director General for External Cooperation Management and Project Development with PIOJ. We will also, and I'm very grateful to Lisa Kerbiel, Head of the Secretariat UN Joint SDG Fund, who will be making a presentation from this distance, and also Mr. Courtney Rattray, Undersecretary General, United Nations, High Representative for Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Development Countries, and Small Island Development States. And of course, let me welcome all of you, all our distinguished speakers who will be joining us here today in Jamaica, and of course, from around the world. Greetings from the United Nations country team. On the occasion of the 76th anniversary of the United Nations, we have come together to celebrate the important role that partnerships play in guaranteeing positive growth and holistic development around the world, and in particular in Jamaica. Indeed, the UN Charter of 1945 solidified the pact that we are, in fact, partners in global development. Despite the shocks and the global challenges, the resolve of the United Nations remains very strong to maintain international peace and security, foster friendly relations among nations based on respect and the rule of law, to facilitate and achieve international cooperation in solving development challenges, to promote and encourage respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to be the harmonizing force in the attainment of these common ends. At the center of our efforts is a quest for sustainable development that includes all people, everywhere, and leaves no one behind. The reminder of our common purpose could not be more urgent. COVID-19 has been the greatest challenge of our generation, putting the national and global goals at risk. We have seen a regression among several key indicators globally. Children have missed out on schooling. Reports on family violence have increased. Poverty, previously on the decline, appears to be on the rise. And labor participation rates have fallen, especially among women. Now, this is not exciting new news. Still, today's outlook is a call for greater ambition and a stronger resolve to redouble our efforts within this decade of action and to accelerate progress towards Vision 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. We all need to step things up to be able to achieve the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, Vision 2030 Jamaica. For many of the UN agencies, the COVID-19 pandemic heightened the need for highly collaborative partnerships to assess and respond to a wide range of issues, including those affecting children and adolescents. Allow me to use UNICEF as an example, whereby at the onset of the pandemic, UNICEF worked closely with the Ministry of Health and Wellness and other UN agencies to help deliver vital prevention and mitigation information to key audiences, including parent and caregivers, children, pregnant women, and families with children with disabilities. After several months of the pandemic hitting families hard, UNICEF partnered with the Caribbean Policy and Research Institute, CAPRI, to produce the first assessment of the educational, social, and psychological effects of the COVID pandemic on children. Furthermore, with COVID-19 taking an increasingly difficult toll on families, UNICEF partnered with the National Parenting Support Commission to establish parenting support helplines and teamed up with the private sector organizations of Jamaica, PSOJ, and the Office of the Children's Advocate to launch Safe Spot, a helpline to provide counseling support for children and adolescents. Through a multilateral partnership with the Private Sector Vaccine Initiative and the Ministry of Health, UNICEF supported the development of a digital vaccine information management platform designed to efficiently and securely manage the national vaccine rollout. These and all the agencies, funds, and programs working closely with government, civil society, and the private sector in Jamaica. This is the true power of partnership. And we have so many success stories which could be highlighted if we had more time. And you'll hear some others today. Together, we must work to address public health issues, strengthen critical supply chains, mitigate the effects of climate change, reduce inequalities, and ensure that access to development financing is equitable and fair. Now, I must recognize that the government of Jamaica has demonstrated global leadership in this fight for increased and diversified development financing. I recall the Honorable Prime Minister Holness joining the Prime Minister of Canada, the UN Secretary General, heads of states and governments, and key international partners to convene the Financing for Development in the Era of COVID-19 and Beyond initiative in 2020. Now, Jamaica will require adequate fiscal space and funding to achieve the SDGs and be able to recover from the health, social, and economic implications of the pandemic. So I call on all stakeholders, especially the private sector, to expand their support of the development financing agenda through financial, technical, and other resources, as well as through technological advancements, innovation, and knowledge sharing. The UN country team in Jamaica has embarked on a number of joint programs around development financing in recent times, thanks to the support of the Joint SDG Fund. These include strengthening the public finance management capacity of the Ministry of Finance, the Ministries of Education, Youth and Information, and Health and Wellness, as well as modernizing the social protection system in Jamaica, which includes piloting more efficient, effective, and safe payment processes within Jamaica's social protection system, and undertaking gender gap analyses of the policy and legislative social protection frameworks to ensure responsiveness of the system to the needs of men and women, thereby narrowing existing inequalities. At the end of next week, we will also be submitting another proposal for funding to the Joint SDG Fund to establish Jamaica's first innovative impact investment fund, which seeks to raise 36 million over 5 years to support high impact SMEs and startups. This work is being supported by UNDP, UNICEF, UNCDF, Draper Ventures, Delta Capital Partners, and other local entities. It is only through solid partnerships that we can meet the SDGs, and therefore we need your help. So today I am delighted that this forum brings together government, private sector, and third sectors, academia, other international development partners, civil society, and young people, all the important stakeholders whom we are very happy to engage and exchange ideas with over the next 3 days. Ladies and gentlemen, the relationship with partners should never be seen as a one-way street. No, I believe that if we work together, we can realize benefits for all of us. After all, in the end, the objective is to encourage socioeconomic development in Jamaica, raise people out of poverty, provide quality healthcare for all, ensure that all children have access to education, aid in the fight against crime and violence, help all women and men to achieve their best and highest potential, prevent the negative impacts of climate change, and achieve sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Over the next 3 days, our speakers will share best practices and talk about the initiatives being employed to expand and realize our vision for socioeconomic development. We have been operating in silos for far too long. And so it is our hope that this week's event will inch us closer towards a more unified way of working. All of our partners should be aware that we are listening carefully to identify the needs you have and whether there are areas where the United Nations can contribute. I also want to emphasize that this should not and will not be a one-off conversation. We aim to continue careful engagement with all stakeholders. In about a month, as part of a longer-term strategy, the UN country team here in Jamaica will be undertaking a partnership landscape assessment aligned with national priorities and our new multi-country sustainable development cooperation framework to identify existing mechanisms for engaging stakeholders and sectors towards the SDGs, as well as thematic areas and issues where there is strong potential for new partnerships across sectors in Jamaica and with regional and global institutions and potential donors. Beyond Jamaica, the United Nations is also cooperating extensively with its partners throughout the Caribbean, including through the development of the new cooperation framework that represents the UN's vision of socioeconomic development for the entire English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean. We are also collaborating with other small island development states beyond the Caribbean to represent the interest of those SIDS in a coordinated and inclusive ways. In New York and other decision-making centers around the world, Jamaica has joined the United Nations to make the arguments that SIDS, like Jamaica, are deserving, not of special treatment, but equitable and diverse consideration for access to funding, always taking into account the unique risk associated with climate change and the cost associated with necessary adoption strategies. Risk, I dare say, created by developed countries, but for which economies like Jamaica bear the brunt. This morning, we will hear from different speakers about how partnerships are and can contribute to achieving the 2030 agenda in Jamaica. I invite you back this afternoon as we hear about what private and third sectors can and should do to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I am particularly looking forward to hearing the discussions about how human rights and gender equality are not just nice to haves, but a cornerstone of successful business. Tomorrow, we will hear from civil society about some of their best practices regarding sustainable partnerships with different UN agencies. These agencies will also have the opportunity to share their own experience. On Friday, we will host a workshop on building and scaling up effective partnerships. We want to use this workshop as a way to better understand the current partnership landscape in Jamaica, but also to identify how everyone can contribute to improve our partner relationships. Last but not by no means least, This week also features a special thank you to our frontline workers on the heels of Jamaica's Heroes Day. Allow me to thank Honorable Minister Grange publicly for encouraging all Jamaicans to especially recognize the contributions of our frontline heroes at this time. Through the Light Jamaica Blue initiative, UN and partners express gratitude to a wide range of essential staff who continue to partner with the peoples in government to help reduce, avert, and recover from the impact of COVID-19. Now, I don't want to go on any longer because I am certain that you all are eager to listen to the important words of our many distinguished speakers, such as the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang and my good friend, Ambassador Rattray, Undersecretary General. You will hear more from me later in the program today. For now, let me pass the floor back to our talented moderator, who will introduce our next guest speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Connell. And if certainly anything resonated with you, we encourage you to let us know in the comment section, what were the parts of his speech and his delivery that really sat with you. While I was listening to him and I was taking my notes, what he reminded us of is that the SDGs were always the goals that we were always going for. And even though, yes, we've been impacted by COVID-19, we will not stop. We certainly will not throw our hands in the air. We will not give up. What it means is that in these unprecedented times, we double down, we step up, we align, and we unite. So we will continue to look at the gaps. We should continue to look at the impact. We should continue to assess who it is we can partner with. And instead of competing, let us collaborate. As I listened to Dr. Connell, all I could think of is the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So I absolutely look forward to hearing more about the United Nations of Jamaica, but even United Nations generally, as we continue to have meaningful conversations and we see meaningful collaborations turn in and convert into meaningful actions as well as outcomes. So again, thank you so very much to Dr. Gary Connell for always being willing to partner to make that meaningful impact. So we just heard from Dr. Gary Connell, and he gave us a very good oversight and overview of what this is all about. I now welcome Ms. Barbara Scott, Deputy Director General, External Corporation Management and Project Development, PIOJ, to bring her remarks. Please welcome her to the digital stage.
Thank you. Chairperson Dr. Terry Carrell Reid, the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Ambassador Courtney Rattray, United Nations Under-Secretary General, High Representative for Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States, Dr. Gary Connell, United Nations Resident Coordinator, Mrs. Therese Turner-Jones, IDB Regional Manager, other members of the Diplomatic Corps, UN representatives, and all UN staff. Other distinguished guests, good morning all. The Planning Institute of Jamaica offers our congratulations to the agencies of the United Nations on your 76th anniversary celebrations. It is indeed our pleasure to be sharing with you on this very special occasion. 76 years is a long time. It is a lifetime. It is significant not just on account of the number of years, but also the opportunity it affords to reflect on the goals and aspirations of the UN as an organization over the period. There is undoubtedly much food for reflection. Anniversaries evoke a compulsion to look back and at the same time look forward. Your 76th anniversary provides an opportunity to reflect on the impact of the partnership which Jamaica has enjoyed with the UN over the years. Jamaica gained membership to the UN in 1962 when the country achieved independence. This marked the beginning of a most fruitful partnership in which the UN has collaborated with the government on a wide range of development issues. The UN agencies, each with their respective mandates and comparative advantages, have seen successes in tackling critical development issues related to children and youth, environment and climate change, population, health, education, safety and security, and social protection, to name a few. The UN has provided assistance to establish organizations such as the Office of the Children's Advocate and the Parenting Commission. Invaluable institutional strengthening has been provided to a number of ministries, departments, and agencies, such as the Statistical Institute, the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, the Ministry of Agriculture, among others. Support has also been provided to a number of civil society organizations to build their capacity to deliver well-needed services to vulnerable groups. In addition, we recognize the UN's work in community empowerment, disaster risk management, public finance management, gender-based violence, and more recently, in supporting so effectively our country's COVID response. Indeed, there is scarcely a sector or an area across the socio-economic and environmental landscape of Jamaica that has not benefited in some way from UN support. The UN's commitment to assist Jamaica in achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and by extension, the Sustainable Development Goals, is a commitment to align itself with Jamaica's strategic priorities as articulated in Vision 2030, our long-term development plan, or vehicle for attaining our SDGs. A particular strength that the UN brings to its development engagement is its focus on and capacity for advocacy, especially on behalf of the vulnerable. Through advocacy, the UN has been influential in encouraging state and non-state actors to adopt policies and to pursue actions in the interest of vulnerable populations. Although in recent years, there have been challenges mobilizing resources in sufficient quantities to meet the plethora of development needs in Jamaica, the efforts by the UN to mobilize resources has not waned, nor has the effort to contribute to national development reduced. Instead, the drive to identify funding has intensified, along with efficiency gains resulted in the adopting of a more targeted approach in the design of country programs, greater emphasis on projects which have potential to be catalytic, more focus on results-based management and monitoring and evaluation, as well as on more upstream activities in the areas of policy reform and legal and regulatory frameworks. The UN in Jamaica continues admirably to pivot to sustain its operations and maintain relevance to national development. Of special note is the recent organization of the Resident Coordinator's Office, which is indeed commendable. As a partner, the Planning Institute is aware of the operational factors which affect project implementation, and we welcome the flexibility being demonstrated by the UN to respond in creative ways to address issues such as fiscal and human resource constraints. We acknowledge with gratitude the contribution of the UN to the development of Jamaica. There is no question that the contribution has been profound and transformational. The programs and policies which have been implemented with UN support have generated new thinking and have helped to lay a strong foundation for a modern state and the achievement of our goal of developed country status. The Planning Institute of Jamaica, again, wishes for the UN many more years of successful operations, both locally and globally. We hope for and are committed to a sustained and successful partnership between Jamaica and the UN towards the achievement of the goals of Vision 2030, our National Development Plan, and the SDGs. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Barbara Scott, Deputy Director General, External Cooperation Management and Project Development, PIOJ, reminding us that the UN support covers the length and breadth across socio-economic and environmental industries and entities. And that is strategic if we're ever to achieve those SDGs. And it comes from having a shared vision, having focus in terms of enhancing and building out capacity, and having the commitment and dedication that is transformational, consistent, and constant. Thank you so very much. Now, Lisa Kerbiel, Head of Secretariat, UN Joint SDG Fund, promotes partnerships with governments, UN entities, civil societies, academia, private sector, and family offices to design and implement integrated policy approaches and innovative financing vehicles to accelerate progress towards the SDGs. We welcome her in this video presentation. They can't hear the audio. At this high-level dialogue as part of the my special thanks colleagues, I'd like to congratulate you on the program that we funded the funds. Jamaica is one of the 69 countries around the world developing a new way to assess public, private, and development finance, create clear links between policy, planning, and budget, and at the same time, deepen partnerships and financial resources toward countries' priority areas. Countries like Jamaica, the development of finance strategies in the public finance management.
Jamaica, home of the resilient, passionate and hard-working. A people and a nation who have achieved and defied all odds, working to keep their economy growing, their country thriving, from investments made in innovative opportunities and exports demanded globally. We have a vision, now within our grasp, where Jamaica becomes the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. We will not let go of this vision. We will grow. We will overcome these challenging times and look to the future with hope and positivity. These are special times. The world as we know it has changed, but home will always be in our hearts. And in Jamaica, you can always find a home. Think you know Jamaica? Look again. You will be surprised.
What if they knew that you abused her? Her family?
Mr. Jones.
And your colleagues, how will they look at an abuser? When the law comes knocking, you'll have nowhere to run.
Mr. Brown, you're under arrest. Please get up.
Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade has joined us and is here to bring her official greetings. Please make her welcome.
Madam Moderator, the inimitable Dr. Terry Reid, the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, Dr. Gary Connell, Resident Coordinator, UN Jamaica, Ambassador Courtney Rattray, UN Under Secretary General, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the Consular Corps, development partners, all ladies and gentlemen joining us online across the globe and right here in Kingston. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. It is a great pleasure to bring greetings on behalf of the government of Jamaica to the 2021 UN Partnership Forum. This forum provides an opportunity for us to recognize and applaud the work of the United Nations, which continues to positively impact the lives of Jamaicans and which remains a beacon for all humanity. Over the last 76 years, the UN has successfully mobilized our community of nations for the common good, in furtherance of its principles, all of which are enduring guideposts for the conduct of international affairs among its member states and even newer actors on the international stage. As a broker of the Partnership for Peace, Planet, and Prosperity, the UN continues to play a critical role in harmonizing the international community's efforts to tackle our contemporary and old challenges. These include cooperation on safeguarding our planet from the existential threat of climate change, promoting gender equality, reducing poverty and inequality, and promoting inclusive partnerships for sustainable development. These objectives are not only noble aspirations, they are real issues that touch the lives of ordinary people all over the world every day. Ultimately, progress on these issues means a better life, a better quality of life for Jamaicans and for people everywhere. This is why Jamaica is proud to play an active role in advancing the aims and objectives of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamaica's decision to join the UN immediately after gaining political independence in 1962 was born out of the recognition of the critical importance of multilateralism. As a young nation, we recognize the power of partnerships, of international partnerships, in meeting the needs and development aspirations of our people. Over the last 59 years, our partnership with the UN, and particularly through the UN country team and specialized agencies in Jamaica, has been nothing short of transformative. At the national level, the UN has played a pivotal role in facilitating the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica, the National Development Plan. In this connection, given our extensive alignment, we also continue to receive critical support towards achieving the SDGs. I wish to recognize in particular today the ongoing technical assistance and financial support that the UN has committed to our fight against the COVID-19 pandemic as we seek to build back better and leave no one behind. We are especially thankful to the UN for providing almost 7,000 healthcare workers or unsung heroes with access to personal protective equipment, including more than 10,000 disposable surgical respirator masks. In collaboration with the UN country team, we've managed to procure equipment for approximately 28 ventilators. We've also scaled up our testing capacity with their assistance through the training of staff at the national laboratories on molecular detection of COVID-19, results interpretation, and in the operation of the RT-PCR machines to detect COVID-19. The vaccine management platform facilitated through UNICEF has been absolutely critical, and we look forward to making further progress in tackling vaccine hesitancy through a partnership on a coordinated communications campaign. Through these concerted efforts as a country, we are and will be in a much better place than we were at the start of the pandemic. For that, we are truly appreciative of the UN. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve the SDGs, we must do more than recognize the connections between people, planet, and prosperity. We must continue to reinvigorate the spirit of multilateralism that has underpinned our partnership with the UN and leverage its transformative power. It's therefore entirely positive that this forum will facilitate discussions on the UN multi-country sustainable development cooperation framework for the Caribbean. This framework is the result of an extensive consultative process with the government, IDPs, NGOs, the private sector, civil society, and academia. It is my hope that through this forum and beyond, many, many more persons will become more keenly involved in this instrument and for setting the UN's development activities locally. We must strive to increase local awareness of just how important the UN's programming has been and continues to be for improving the lives of every Jamaican. In closing, as we look forward to celebrating the 76th anniversary of the UN on October 24th, I once again applaud our resident coordinator and each and every one of the 13 member-strong United Nations country team and specialized agencies, which we are pleased to host here in Jamaica. We applaud you for your hard work and indeed for your commitment to ensuring Jamaica's prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish for this forum every success, and I thank you for your time and welcoming me here.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Senator, the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. I echo her sentiment. You know, she reminded us that the UN nation, not just globally, but Jamaica, is doing is we're taking some of the old issues, we're tackling those old issues, we're also reassessing new and emerging issues, and we're trying to deal with it. And that requires a strong team, it requires collaboration, it requires unification across many industries with different kinds of partners, with flexibility, innovation, agility, adaptability. And listening to your delivery and your speech, all I could see was a common thread throughout all of the speeches and all of the remarks that we've heard so far. And it really means that, you know, until the rights for all are acknowledged and respected, and until there's access for all to health, education, equality, jobs, opportunities, and until we are deliberate in our thoughts and in our actions where the environment is concerned, then we will never be satisfied, and we should never be satisfied. We should always endeavor to do more, especially in these areas. And I really want to commend the United Nations office here in Jamaica, and of course, all of the other United Nations partners for really collaborating to ensure that there is this peace for planet and for prosperity for all. I just want to remind you, if you are a part of the conversation, you like to share it with your friends, your family, your network, please go ahead, use the hashtag UN Jamaica as well as UN Day. If you are there on the VFairs platform and it's your very first time, don't worry about it. It is highly interactive. There is an auditorium and everything there is actually clickable. So with all of our panelists and speakers who you will hear from over the next 3 days, if you go to the tab, Meet Our Speakers, you can get a full idea of the profile of each speaker and panelist on the program. We also have an exhibitors hall. You have virtual booths from all of our UN partners, I think over 30 booths where you can go, you can browse, you can get your resources and learn more about how you possibly could get involved. There's also a photo booth, I hear, that you can go and get your digital photo taken. So again, thank you for joining us across YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, those of you who are tweeting live, as well as those of you who are joining us on the VFairs platform. Again, this is 3 days, and we are certainly glad that we can celebrate 76 years with the United Nations. And this is the 2021 UN Week Partnership Forum. Now, earlier we had a little glitch with the Lisa Kerbiel video, but I think we're still trying to figure it out, and that is fine. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our very first speaker. And our very first speaker is the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, Deputy Prime Minister of Jamaica and Minister of National Security. Certainly a very busy gentleman, and we're very grateful that he could join us today. Kindly make him welcome.
Morning. Our moderator, Dr. Terry Carroll Reid, my colleague, Senator Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Dr. Gary Connell, our resident coordinator, United Nations in Jamaica, Ambassador Courtney Rattray, United Nations Under Secretary General, Ms. Lisa Kerbiel, Head of Secretariat, United Nations Joint Sustainable Development Goals, Ms. Teresa Turner-Jones, the IDB Country Rep and Caribbean Manager, Ms. Barbara Scott, Deputy Director General of the PIOJ, members of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, across the media, across the globe, listening in on the United Nations activity through YouTube and Zoom and other virtual means. Mr. John Baez, please forgive me for missing here from the PSOJ of Jamaica. All distinguished ladies and gentlemen across listening, it is said that necessity is the mother of invention. I would want to further posit that necessity is the master of innovation. As history would have it, in an innovative response to challenges and harsh realities of post-World War I and II, the then world leaders established the United Nations as the bastion and standard for peace, global stability, and human upliftment. Dr. Connell, on behalf of the government and people of Jamaica, please accept my heartiest congratulations on the 76th anniversary of the United Nations. Jamaica has contributed to and benefited from the United Nations guiding principles of equity, cooperation, respect for human rights, and fundamental freedom for all without distinction. Indeed, it is only through collaboration and partnerships that countries can truly aspire to lasting peace and prosperity. I'm inspired by the theme of this year's anniversary celebrations, partnerships for peace, planet, and prosperity. At a time when all countries of the world are required to find innovative solutions for the social, economic, financial, and psychological fallout from the ongoing global health crisis, it is opportune to revisit and take a fresh look at the roadmap that was crafted some 76 years ago in the United Nations Charter. Countries across the world today contend with the scarcity of essential commodities, increasing number of fatalities as a result of COVID-19, vaccine diplomacy and limited availability of life-saving medicines, upended global logistics and competitive and oftentimes unequal international trade regimes. At the regional level, our challenges are accentuated by political instability, social unrest, and mass migration in our neighboring Haiti. Well-financed transnational criminal networks and the unpredictable delivery of vaccine options. In what has been described as the most severe public health crisis in the 20th century, small island developing states such as Jamaica and the countries of the Caribbean region must compete and contend for limited available medical resources and provide the necessary assurances to our people. We have only been able to successfully engage in this global vaccine race because of partnerships. In other words, the effectiveness of our national response to the ongoing global public health crisis has been determined by the degree to which we forge strong collaborative partnerships. However, the question will remain outstanding. Should not the United Nations, through its relevant agencies, have played a much greater role in the pandemic? It's the first event of this kind that has happened since the founding of the United Nations. Should the regulatory agency have played such a dominant role as they have through the WHO? As I consider Jamaica's broader development plans, our policy priorities, and the government's mission to recover stronger post-COVID-19, I'm mindful of the fact that the United Nations and its agencies here in Jamaica have been consistent and reliable partners. And I wish to emphasize, I wish to acknowledge all the agencies of the United Nations that are resident here in Jamaica, and to thank you for always finding ways to support the vision of Jamaica as a place to live, raise families, do business, and retire after having achieved the Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, on September 18, 1962, Jamaica became a member of the United Nations over these 59 years. Jamaica has played an active role in the United Nations system, having championed the cause of the International Year of Human Rights and advocating for a renewed public commitment in member states' efforts to give effect to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Jamaica was determined and continues to reaffirm faith in the fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small. Sir Alexander Bustamante, who spearheaded Jamaica's entry in the United Nations, understood the importance of a multilateral system in which all member states, irrespective of size or gross domestic product, are regarded equally. Today, our government is committed to reinvigorated United Nations and a multilateral system that facilitates partnership through which small states like Jamaica are able to navigate the global scarcities and have equal access to life-saving vaccines. As we move closer to the 2030 target for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, that need for strong, collaborative, and strategic partnerships becomes even more evident. Given the impact of COVID-19, our ability to achieve SDG goals for quality education, Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, for example. We will necessarily require greater emphasis on strengthening the means of implementation and revitalizing the global partnerships for sustainable development. Partnerships are crucial to Jamaican efforts to achieve the sustainable development goals. The last 18 months have reminded us of the power of multilateralism and its value in engendering partnerships. As I close, I wish to underscore the fact that the United Nations remains the epicenter of equity, partnership, and global collaboration. As we recognize and commemorate the 76th anniversary of the United Nations, let us review afresh the determinants as set out in the United Nations Charter. Jamaica, like all other nations of the world, is having to innovate in order to pivot in the ongoing global health crisis. The government of Jamaica is committed to pursuing and promoting partnerships in order to meet the needs of our people and fulfill our national development plans. We will continue to participate and actively advocate for partnerships within the United Nations system and other multilateral fora as we work towards establishing partnerships for peace, planet, and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. As I was listening to him, and I was also watching Antoinette Tony Aiken, who's our sign language interpreter, and I'm hearing us repeat the words of, just having equality and access for all. You have to think about our persons who are living in Jamaica, around the world inclusive, who are living with disabilities and special needs. And even though COVID has been extremely rough for a lot of us, it has impacted us so negatively. Can you imagine those communities, the ones living with disabilities? They often don't get job opportunities. They often do not make it all the way up to tertiary education or even secondary education. So can you imagine if we were actually able to achieve our SDGs, where someone living with disabilities, our weakest member of our society, could contribute in a great way simply because that society acknowledges that human right, acknowledges that fundamental right that they have access to everything. Can it be achievable? I absolutely believe it can. Can it be done alone? It cannot. And that is why Dr. Horace Chang, the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, was speaking about strong, collaborative, strategic partnerships are necessary. And I believe that it can be done. Thank you so very much to our speakers. Now, earlier on, we had some technical glitches with Lisa Kerbiel, the video presentation, and I believe we're all set and ready to go. Before we get into our panel discussion, we certainly want to ensure that you get to benefit from these videos. Have a watch.
Jamaica, UN Resident Coordinator Gary Connell, development partners, head of diplomatic missions, civil society, private sector representatives, partners, and friends. My name is Lisa Kerbiel. I'm head of the Joint SDG Fund Secretariat. I'm honored to speak at this high-level partnership dialogue as part of the United Nations Jamaica Partnership Week. My special thanks to United Nations Resident Coordinator Gary Connell for this opportunity. Colleagues, in my capacity as head of the fund, I'd like to congratulate Jamaica on being successfully selected as one of the 62 programs that received funding from the Joint SDG Fund last year through the fund's first call for proposals on the enabling environment for SDG financing. Our SDG financing portfolio is focused on two pillars: developing an enabling environment for SDG financing and supporting catalytic investments that have the potential to leverage additional resources for SDG acceleration. Jamaica is one of the 69 countries around the world that are developing a new wave of SDG financing strategies to assess the public, private, and development finance landscape in the country, create clear links between policies, planning, and budgeted processes, and at the same time, deepen partnerships and financial resources toward countries' priority SDG areas. For countries like Jamaica, the development of financing strategies in the public finance management system ensure efficient, effective, and equitable resource allocation towards the SDGs. At the same time, given the government's responsibility for the national budget, aid coordination, resource mobilization, and financing strategies, their ownership of this project is the only key ingredient to sustain the transformative change needed. I'm very pleased to highlight the close collaboration among the United Nations and the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, and the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Meanwhile, under the second pillar of the Joint SDG Fund, the catalytic investment pillar, Jamaica's ambition is to structure and build an impact fund and an impact venture. The Evergreen Fund seeks to be initially capitalized at US $30 million, with $6 million of which potentially could be first loss tranche. The problem to be solved is building innovative entrepreneurship in small and nascent but open market. High impact small and medium enterprises and startups are being staged as a pipeline, and a combination of local and international fund managers are being lined up, including Delta Capital and Draper Ventures. This innovative instrument may be the first of its kind in Jamaica, and we hope contribute to wider market creation. And the idea and design have been supported by the UN Development Program, UNICEF, and the UN Capital Development Fund. We look forward to receiving the final proposal at the end of this month, and we would like to see you being successful in this endeavor. Before I conclude, I'd like to emphasize one last critical element, which has been identified as a common factor in all the projects funded by the Joint SDG Fund: their ability to leverage multi-million-dollar grants from our fund into the billions of sustainable development with the support of a wide range of partners. It is our hope that many other programs with innovative solutions to development challenges can be funded across enough countries and contexts to fully bridge the gap in SDG financing and ensure a sustainable and equitable future. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and goodbye.
Thank you so very much, Lisa Kerbiel, taking us through speaking about Jamaica's role and involvement, and certainly our ambition to have this structured development financing that is going to help to push us to where we absolutely need to go. Thank you so very much, Lisa Kerbiel. And I'd just like to thank you so very much for your patience. I do understand that we're having technical glitches, and I do crave your indulgence. Certainly, we do not want to pass over anyone. We do not want to pass over any particular video that was presented and pre-recorded for your benefit. And therefore, we would just like to, again, thank you for your patience and your kind attention. We're going to throw, and I hope that the video is ready. I believe I'm getting that it is. Mr. Courtney Rattray, United Nations Under-Secretary General, High Representative for Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States. He was supposed to have made his delivery before the Minister, the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, but we just wanted to ensure that the video was absolutely okay. So at this time, we do welcome Mr. Courtney Rattray's presentation.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this special occasion. You know, I may have left the Jamaican mission to the United Nations, but I can assure you that the mission of Jamaica, in its widest sense, has not and will never leave me. I am particularly pleased, therefore, to speak to you today on the theme that you have chosen to mark UN 76, namely Partnerships for Peace, Planet, and Prosperity. Partnerships is at the heart of everything that we do in my UN office, the Office of the High Representative for Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States, OHR-LLS. Whether that's convening the public and private sectors to deliver for people and the planet, fostering South-South cooperation, or bringing islands together to harness the blue economy. All that we do is to the benefit of our constituents, the 91 most vulnerable countries in the world. A huge test of our partnership ethos will arise next year in Doha, Qatar, as we convene the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries. There we will launch a new LDC program of action for the next 10 years that will embody the theme we are discussing today: peace, prosperity, and a safer planet. And at the heart of it all will be successful partnerships. Ahead of today's event, when I started to think about the value of partnerships, I recalled a remarkable feat achieved by one of Jamaica's most celebrated sons. I speak about the cricketer, Michael Holding. Now, Holding is obviously famous for his fast bowling, but he actually still holds the world record for the last wicket partnership in a one-day international, a last stand partnership that accounted for 106 runs against England back in 1984. Now, I suppose I should mention that the guy at the other end was one Sir Vivian Richards, and that he scored 93 of the combined 106 runs. But that actually makes my point. Successful partnerships rely on each party coming together and combining their strengths and allowing each other to succeed and to thrive. Nowhere is this more true than in our work with small island developing states, and that is where I'd like to focus my remarks today. It is, after all, where my past and present jobs most obviously collide, a partnership of its own kind, forged between the national and international levels, which I hope can lead to a better future. My office is absolutely committed to our roles as the Secretariat for the SIDS Partnership Framework and the SIDS Global Business Network. These are crucial forums for developing partnerships and forging joint working relationships with the private sector. And I'm always pleased to see Jamaica represented at the forefront of such initiatives. This is, in fact, vital work. Ocean business partnerships are an important part of the sustainable development path for small island developing states. We need to come together so we can tackle the adverse impacts of things like overfishing, pollution, and climate change. And these were all challenges enough even before we started to feel the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you know, SIDS are now experiencing drastic falls in revenues from sectors like tourism and fisheries, which are having huge impacts on people's livelihoods across the islands. Last year, SIDS suffered significant economic scarring as a result of the pandemic, losing over 9% of their GDP compared to 3% in some other developing countries. But we cannot lose hope. As Malayla Yousafzai, the young Pakistani activist for female education, once said, we realize the importance of the light when we see darkness. I was pleased to see, as part of your UN Week program, the recognition of the frontline heroes who have helped to reduce, avert, and recover from the impact of the pandemic. We owe it to them, more than anyone else, to truly find a way to build back better. And for me, better is synonymous with together. During the pandemic, we at the UN, we have had to adapt the way we work and support you. Last December, our SIDS Global Business Network organized a series of webinars on partnership opportunities for sustainable blue economy transition and pandemic recovery in SIDS, in which we brought together private sector, public and civil society stakeholders. This was a concrete expression of the objective of the SIDS Accelerated Modalities of Action, or the Samoa Pathway for Effective Development, which puts fostering partnerships at its heart. And rightly so, because without partnerships, neither SIDS nor their development partners could expect to overcome and recover from the pandemic, nor could they preserve the gains made towards the achievement of the Samoa Pathway and the 2030 Agenda. In February next year, we have a huge opportunity to regain impetus on our shared agenda. My office will host the Global Business Network Forum during the Our Ocean Conference in Palau in mid-February. This biannual forum is focused on developing partnerships in ocean industries, especially with the private sector. This is important because we all know that SIDS face inherent vulnerabilities. Their small size, high exposure to external shocks, and narrow resource and export base. But it is through partnerships that these vulnerabilities can be addressed. innovative partnerships can provide economies of scale, support resilience building, and facilitate sustainable infrastructure development. By adopting a project aggregation strategy, SIDS can achieve results that would be impossible by acting alone. For example, by joining forces, multiple SIDS and their partners can develop and submit larger scale climate adaptation project proposals to the Green Climate Fund within a single portfolio. Or they can bundle their investment projects to attract investments from the large institutional investors. We are, in fact, developing a financial model with private sector partners in which a suite of SIDS sustainable infrastructure projects can be packaged to attract long-term financing at reasonable costs by marketing an SDG bond to institutional investors. The idea is to structure the bond so that it fits into the high-grade liquid fixed income allocation of institutional investors such as pension funds, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds. The point is, acting together can reap rewards. You know, the world capital markets currently hold over $100 trillion in assets under management. Acting alone, islands will not have the ability to access a fair share of the financial assets intermediated by the capital markets. In fact, by going it alone, SIDS won't stand much of a chance of accessing this pool of capital, even if they are able to provide investors a return that is commensurate with the perceived risk premium that is required by institutional investors. But by developing partnerships between SIDS from across the globe, working with development partners in designing de-risking tools, we will facilitate access to these funds for the sustainable development of island communities. Another of our priorities is the coordination of work within the UN on the potential development of a multidimensional vulnerability index, an MVI. As I had occasion to note recently, this is an idea whose time has not only arrived, but is long overdue. Small island developing states have been calling attention to the need for action on their vulnerabilities ever since 1992, when US President Bill Clinton was first elected. This is a central priority of the Alliance of Small Island Developing States, AOSIS, in this current session of the UN General Assembly. The MVI has the potential to extend the eligibility of concessional finance to middle-income SIDS. Because of their relatively high per capita income, they are deemed ineligible to receive these concessional funds. However, we know that unidimensional and simplistic criteria that places primary emphasis on income per capita does not serve as an effective measure of a country's stage of development. This is because they fail to capture the vulnerabilities faced by SIDS, vulnerabilities that can see a country's entire economy wiped out as a result of a single natural disaster or external economic shock. So SIDS are proposing that a new approach to concessional finance be adopted. They are also making a case for the establishment of a sovereign debt restructuring mechanism and a global credit ratings agency. Together, these could provide long-term debt relief for highly indebted countries. Against this backdrop, and as we look forward to COP26, we are hopeful that what will emerge is a renewed global partnership based on increased solidarity. I will be traveling to Glasgow to make a simple, direct plea. Climate change and debt vulnerability are central impediments to SIDS development, and both must and indeed can be addressed, and addressed together. We are also working with ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and other partners to launch an initiative to develop climate adaptation debt swaps. These innovative financing instruments that we are piloting are designed to purchase SIDS sovereign debt on secondary markets at a discount via an international development institution that will become the new creditor. This institution will then allow the country to service its debt by channeling payments to an adaptation fund that the country would then be able to access in order to address its climate adaptation and resilience needs. Such an instrument would operate in a similar way to blue bonds and could certainly support climate adaptation and resilience building projects in islands like Jamaica. So friends, let us consider what underpins all of this. An organization where I now work that was founded on the very idea that global partnerships are what truly matter in achieving a safer, fairer, more prosperous world. So I could not be more proud than at the 76th anniversary of the United Nations, our guiding principles are enshrined in a recent report by the UN Secretary General, which is called Our Common Agenda. One of the key commitments contained within our common agenda is to boost partnerships. It calls for stronger engagement between the UN system, international financial institutions, and regional development banks. More systematic engagement with parliaments, subnational authorities, and the private sector. Civil society focal points in all UN entities. Annual meetings between the UN and all heads of regional organizations, and the UN Office of Partnerships to consolidate access and inclusion, including accessibility online. This approach recognizes that without successful, thriving partnerships at its core, the United Nations cannot fulfill its mandate on behalf of we, the people. So I want to close by sharing with you some words by Una Marson, the trailblazing Jamaican poet. She wrote a poem called The Test, which I think speaks to the challenges still facing us today, challenges which find answers in our common agenda, and challenges which find expression in partnership. She wrote, "The test of true culture is the ability to move among men, east or west, north or south, with ease and confidence, radiating the pure light of a kindly humanity." Well, I won't spoil her poetry with any more of my prose. I will only close by saying thank you, a big thank you once again, for inviting me to speak at this auspicious occasion, and to wish you the best in celebrating United Nations Day and UN Week. I thank you.
What a fitting way. What a beautiful poem. What a fitting way to close. Thank you so very much, Mr. Courtney Rattray, United Nations Under Secretary General High Representative for least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. You know, he used the analogy using cricket, great Michael Holding. I think I was 2 at the time when that legendary partnership took place, but certainly when you come from a home that loves cricket and is all about the West Indies, naturally you learn it as a point of reference for one of the greatest partnerships ever. But just the parts, my biggest takeaways, the parts that resonated with me when he said, you know, it's when parties combine strengths and allow each to thrive for that common goal. So it's all a common goal. So it's all about creating a safer, fairer, more prosperous world. And it gives us a great idea, listening to his delivery there. It gives us an idea of the layers of partnership, that it has to do with policy, government, finance, economic, social, as well as environmental. But certainly I appreciated his points. Acting together can reap rewards, and better is synonymous to together. Thank you so very much. Now, we mentioned that the United Nations office here in Jamaica has just done so much. They've mobilized a lot. They've helped. They've put out grants. They've partnered. They've tried to do everything across various industries, across various entities. And so we just want to give you a little snippet of what they've been up to.
As the specialized United Nations agency responsible for the promotion of decent work, the International Labour Organization, ILO, is working with the government of Jamaica, employers' organizations, and trade unions to achieve a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient COVID-19 recovery that leaves no one behind. The ILO estimates that 43% of Jamaica's economy operates informally. Many of these workers experience decent work deficits and face poverty without income security and social protection. Their situations have worsened because of economic slowdowns caused by the pandemic. Through the Jamaica Formalization Project, workers in predominantly informal sectors such as domestic services, agriculture, and fisheries sectors will be able to transform their livelihoods from subsistence activities to economically sustainable employment. The project is a landmark ILO-funded multi-stakeholder partnership with the Jamaica Household Workers Union, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, the Jamaica Business Development Corporation, and the Rural Agricultural Development Authority. Under the project, hundreds of domestic workers, farmers, and fisherfolk will participate in entrepreneurship and skills training and be integrated in official social protection systems so that they can become socio-economically resilient.
The whole project is about getting decent work, get the laws in place, because the perfect laws are in place, but they are not implemented. So with the project now from the International Labour Organization is a push for all those things to be in place and for domestic workers to be formalized. We're not going to whisper, we are shouting. And because we have the International Labour Organization with us, we're going to fight together, we're going to shout together, we're going to work together, we're going to build relationship so domestic workers can have decent working conditions. Domestic workers are the most vulnerable of all the groups, and their work is not respected, is not professional. Everybody just come and work 2 day year, 3 day year, 4 day year. But this project, under this project, it will professionalize the profession of domestic worker, and for that we are very glad and happy for that.
The project is providing targeted support through a partnership with the JBDC and RADA that will help farmers build the skills they need to successfully manage their own businesses to improve employment and incomes while boosting agricultural and rural development.
The partnership between JBDC and RADA under the formalization project will result in our farmers being exposed to best business practices to be able to sustain their farming business, while government, on the other hand, will gain revenues from them being formalized, so they will have to start making statutory returns. And the farmers too will get the benefit of pension and housing. Our farmers through this project will be able to better assess their financial position, implement strategies to maximize profits while minimizing loss, because a lot of our farmers have not gone past high school, or so we will be exposing them through these training, in bookkeeping, cash flow and all, so they'll be able to better check themselves to see if this makes sense. If I'm spending enough, how much will I return? So they'll be better equipped to do that. The project will be helping our farmers to achieve the sustainable development goals of becoming more productive, creating sustainable employment, giving employees a sense of pride, after seeing their goals accomplished as a result of their employment in the farming sector and gaining decent work.
By collaborating with the National Insurance Scheme, the project is also facilitating the necessary policy frameworks for formalization.
For these categories of worker based on their jobs, then they're considered vulnerable. You're looking at a domestic worker that if she goes off on leave for maternity purposes, then there's no income for her. You're looking at a small-scale fisherman, not the commercial fisherman. You're looking at a small-scale farmer. Because of the nature of their jobs and how vulnerable they are, and that they can, slip into poverty or abject poverty in an instant, then it is crucial that they are covered by social protection programs such as the NIS. Now, we've heard of instances where fishermen, they go to sea and you never see them again. Now, where they registered with the NIS and they have a spouse and they have children younger than 18, then there's a benefit for their dependents. In the event of a domestic worker, as mentioned before, if she becomes pregnant, then there's a maternity allowance for her. For all categories of workers, we do have a retirement pension. We do have an invalidity pension where persons are not able to work due to an illness, and so the NIS kicks in. But you must be registered and covered. To be covered, you have to be contributing consistently. So it's very important. So it's one measure to ensure that our workers, all workers, are not at the cusp of falling into abject poverty, but there is something in place in the event of any eventuality in life that would see you needing this added coverage. And when we think of COVID-19 as well, the financial opportunities that may be provided by the government, you may be excluded because you're not registered. So it's very important.
It's one thing to read or to hear about what the United Nations Jamaica office does. It's another thing to actually see and to hear from the recipients, and certainly hearing from that domestic worker who said, we're here to work together, shout together, move together. It really just goes to show that persons want to feel valued. Every single person has a role and a responsibility, and they just want to feel valued, like they are part of society. They want to feel respected. And it's just lovely to know that the United Nations Jamaica can be a vehicle for that. So we've been speaking about this dialogue, this discussion that we're going to have. So let us get into it. We will have our very first panel discussion, and the topic is how the power of partnerships can deliver a shared vision for prosperous business, a thriving society, and a healthy environment in Jamaica. We have some fantastic panelists, and I'm going to reintroduce Dr. Gary Connell, UN Resident Coordinator. Happy to have you here with us. How are you?
Excellent, thank you.
Great. Thank you for being here. We also would like to introduce and to welcome Ms. Therese Turner-Jones, Country Representative for Jamaica and General Manager, Caribbean Country Group, IDB. Welcome. Thank you so very much for being here with us. Good morning. Mr. John Biles, Vice President, PSOJ, recently minted OD. Congratulations again. And Mr. Abraham Simmons, National Program Coordinator, GGPE and Health Informatics Specialist. We have carefully curated this panel because we believe that these are the best persons for it. But before we dive into it and we start asking our questions, Dr. Connell, we give you and all the panelists the opportunity to present opening remarks. And I'll start with you.
Thank you so much. Let me say how excited I have to be here and how impressed I am with the friends, colleagues, government officials who have agreed to share the moment with us. I think it's a common realization that we're a critical point. COVID-19 has given us a clear view of our interdependence. It's a strategic moment where we have to make critical decisions on how we move forward in the near future, what kind of country, planet, world we want to live to our children. And one of the important lessons of COVID has been that unless we come at things with a collective perspective, we're unlikely to be successful.
Yes.
And this platform, this opportunity, the next 3 days, we get a chance to not just to discuss the value of partnerships, which I believe today is a given,
Yes.
but how do we go from rhetoric to actual action?
And outcome.
What needs to change in my behavior today and that of my partners so we can be more effective in the partnerships we want to put in place? How do we change the psyche, the knowledge, the understanding of every individual that they're also in their own way a part of this partnership?
Not isolated. Thank you so very much. Ms. Therese Turner-Jones, welcome. Your opening remarks before we dive into this panel discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Reid. First of all, this has been such a rich morning. I want to congratulate Gary and the whole UN family. I spent most of my career working in a UN affiliated organization.
I'm not
And
sure.
so, how is my video? How is my audio?
I'm just checking to see if she's muted. I don't believe
No, I'm not muted.
Oh, fantastic. I can totally hear you. Sorry, that might have been on our side. Welcome. We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna go back then because I want to congratulate Gary and the whole UN family for such a rich morning, sharing with Jamaica and everybody that's online and following us on social media. This has been a fantastic celebration of the 76th anniversary of the UN. So congratulations, Gary, and thank you for inviting the IDB to participate in this panel. I just want to bring it to a real point, which is this is, Heroes Week, and we're celebrating Heroes Week in Jamaica. And I want to say, speaking of partnerships, is a great time to be doing that during Heroes Week. We heard about all of the fabulous things that the UN's doing, but also I want to say, because COVID, as Gary has pointed out and others, has been so central to this theme of today and also the future, I have to say congratulations to all the Jamaicans who've gotten vaccinated and to all of the healthcare workers who are out there in this endeavor to get this country back on its normal footing. And for that, I just want to say to everybody who's not vaccinated yet, this is the moment to do it. Please, 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 the Ministry of Health is doing a Herculean effort to make sure that the vaccines get to every Jamaican. On this issue of COVID and the recovery, I think the rest of the conversation will be around what do we do? How can we fix this? Just to say that because of Jamaica's dependence on tourism, it's been a body slam, and we're all experiencing that. And while there are some green shoots in the economic indicators, I think we know that there are a lot of people who are still hurting in this country, and there's a lot to be done still. And so I'm looking forward to diving deeper in the panel when you get to me. And just to say finally that the IDB's Vision 2025 is of course fully aligned with the UN's multi-country sustainable development cooperation framework, which we are emphasizing today. And just to remind that our vision aligns very much on climate change action, on gender and diversity, on the digital economy, and of course, support for small, medium enterprises. I look forward to going deeper into the discussion as the panel goes on. Thank you, Dr. Reid. This is going really well. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for even speaking about that and for reminding us, we just came on the heels of Heroes Day. Certainly I wear my badge of honor with pride in terms of being vaccinated. We always want to remind everyone that of course we respect everyone's right to have their views naturally, but certainly we realize that the only meaningful partnerships to get the meaningful outcome is to actually work together with the shared vision and to be aligned. And so I thank you so very much for that. So we move to Mr. John Biles. We're waiting to hear his opening remarks before we dive deeper in our panel discussion. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. And thank you very much for having us, having me. Just wanted to say I've learned so much already this morning about how much the UN is doing and how practical the work that is being done is. I'm looking forward to the discussions and hopefully being able to provide a bit of the on-the-ground experiences that I have, and through the PSOJ, we have had on the ground of the crisis, getting through the crisis, and some of the power of partnerships that have come out of the crisis. So
thank you. And thank you. And I echo your sentiment. Certainly being a host for today, the first day, it has given me the opportunity to also learn. I mean, sometimes we're on the outskirts, sometimes we read articles, sometimes we see snippets here and there, but we absolutely don't always understand the magnitude, the length and the depth, certainly of the United Nations, especially the one here in Jamaica. So I do agree with you that just the awareness level here has been absolutely fantastic, and we can't wait to get into it. Mr. Abraham Simmons, somebody who I recognize, I just saw not just about a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago for the Governor General's, I believe, initiatives, National Youth Consultative Conference, which the United Nations, of course, the office in Jamaica partnered with. Welcome, opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reed. It's a pleasure to see you again. Good morning, everyone.
Welcome.
I believe that the Sustainable Development Goals by nature are carefully designed to comprehensively address various areas of our development. On this lap to 2030, the achievement of these goals will certainly require partnerships, one of the critical variables of this forum, and undeniably one of the most important elements of this discussion. I join with His Excellency the Governor General in congratulating the United Nations in Jamaica, Dr. Connell, and the team at the Resident Coordinator's Office for this platform, but also their dedication to forging much needed partnership for the achievement of the goals. Even just recently, as you said, Dr. Reed, the UN partnered with the Governor General's Program for Excellence in our execution of the 2021 Youth Consultative Conference, making young people core and important partners of our path to recovery from the pandemic, but also the actualization of the SDGs. I'm looking forward to a very fruitful conversation.
All right, thank you so very much. We also want to remind you, if you're watching via the VFairs platform, go ahead, drop your questions in the question and answer chat box. And if you're on social media and you have a pressing question, or maybe there's a comment that you believe might add to the value of the conversation, ensure that you use the hashtag UN Day, #UN Jamaica. So the first question, you'll always be the first out of the block, but you look like you're ready for it. In a perfect world, Dr. Connell, how would you picture the engagement that we have with partners around the SDGs and the achievement of this Vision 2030 Jamaica?
I think the good news is we've already registered incredible levels of success. And there is already a good dialogue between different stakeholders, from private, from civil society, from government, from international organizations, around what we need to do better, how we need to work together, how can we add value to each other's work. And so, the positive point is that we've already established an environment where this discussion is happening. Great. And we have best practice experiences that we can build on. So I think it's very, very positive. On a more, prospective view of things, I think everyone needs to ask themselves, given the COVID episode we've just had, if you're doing business the same way, you need to ask yourself then, something's missing. You need to ask yourself, how am I going to behave differently given the experience, the lessons learned of the past 2 years? This is central. The second issue, I think, which is quite important, is that we take the effort to understand these common goals and objectives that have implications for our future. The Vision 2030 Jamaica, the SDGs, these common objectives that we have, our collective ambition, have to be internalized. They have to be understood and accepted. This is going to create the sort of a pave the base so that we have a common understanding of where we want to go collectively, and work from there to understand how your daily work, your daily activity, your organization's work, your private sector activities fit into this global agenda, how it will be influenced by this agenda, but also how it can contribute to this agenda. This is the first step. If by the end of these 3 days, people go back and reassess what they're doing in the context of a good understanding of Jamaica's vision for 2030, in the context of a better understanding of the challenges we're facing globally and the commitments that the member states have made, this is already a big plus. And people will find that it will create new opportunities for them and also will ensure that they have a behavior that's consistent with these goals. Now, I'm a strong believer in individual entrepreneurship, individual creativity, and an individual's capacity to create links to pursue his own goals and collective goals of its community. But we have to start with this common understanding. And what I find is that once we have this common understanding, we're able to move forward in a very constructive way. I think success for me would really be that first we have this common knowledge and understanding. The next few years are going to create incredible opportunities for all of us, but also incredible challenges. We will need to face them together. There's just no way around that. And so that would be, I think, for me, at least the starting point.
Fantastic, thank you. So we speak about the ecosystem, and you've clearly said that there's an environment that has been created where multi-stakeholders understand their role, they understand the bigger picture. But let me throw this question to Ms. Therese Turner-Jones or even Mr. John Biles. You know, in your discussions, as we're, you know, you guys are partners, you're speaking to different members and entities, parties, whether they are startups, small, medium, large, does everyone get the big picture? And if no one, if there are people who don't get the big picture, what are the gaps that we can help to get them to the point where they understand that this is not just good from a rights perspective, but it's good for business as well? And anyone can go first.
Sure, maybe I go first, just because I'm jumping in. I think that's such an excellent question, just because, of course, where Gary and I sit, and because of the institutions we work for, it's in our DNA. So we think about these issues, sustainable development goals, every single day. But what has been illuminating for me since COVID, and in this last year especially, is seeing how the corporate world has taken on these sustainable development goals also as part, almost as part of their corporate social responsibility. So, for example, the private sector arm of the IDB, it's called IDB Invest. When we partner with corporates, whether in Jamaica or throughout this region or in Latin America, we stress these goals. And it's fascinating now how corporate, whether it's America or Jamaica or Bolivia or Argentina, how these goals are now coming to be aligned with shareholder interests, may I say that? Because I think where we are globally is the mindset is changing around. And by the way, this is an absolute great use of the acronym PPP, because we don't usually associate it with peace, planet, and prosperity. We associate it with public-private partnership, which has a different definition altogether. But I love this, the way this is described today, because I think what I'm saying, what I want to say is people are starting to get it, Carrie. People are starting to think about, why am I here, right? It's not just, why am I here? I want to, you know, self-actualize. I want to become whatever I want to become individually. But I think people are really starting to think about the planet, think about their place in the world. And agencies like the UN and of course, multilateral banks like the IDB, part of our mission broadly is to improve lives, but also to take this message in every single thing that we do. So from where I sit, I see growing awareness of these goals. And I think even in remote parts of Jamaica, you'll be surprised at how people, because they're being affected by climate change. Because if you're that farmer or that fisherman who relies on resources from the sea or the earth, you're realizing that my yield has been decreasing in the last few years because of climate change. So everyone is starting to say, well, why is this? And they're connecting the dots. I think the world is in a great place in terms of how we see our vision for a shared prosperity for the future. And yeah, bottom line is, I think the messages are starting to have some impact.
Fantastic, John.
Yes. So I can just give you the example of what happened with us in tourism. That's really the space that I play in. when the crisis hit and we saw the entire tourism industry come to a screeching halt for 3 months, it really pulled all the players together in a very meaningful way. I heard someone say earlier that, you know, it's a common vision. Well, we all had one common vision, and it was recovery. And we also realized that it's an ecosystem. Tourism is an infrastructure. The infrastructure is transportation, it's a craft, it's the attractions, it's a hotel. So the group has never been closer in the history of, as you know, I've been in the business for 20 years. And it really brought that power of the collaboration and the partnership. But it wasn't just the private sector, it was the government as well. We had all the different ministries coming together, looking at the overall economy, but also understanding that tourism was a major player in the recovery program. Mm-hmm. The other area that really brought things together is, you know, I think we all, during that period of time, and I don't just mean in Jamaica, I think worldwide, when everything stopped and you almost saw nature raise its head and resurrect itself into a lot of the towns and cities that were, you know, traditionally overrun by people, and you just saw nature coming back, and there was this understanding that nature was screaming out to come back to the fore. I think there's been an awakening, if we could call that, across the world. And we're seeing it in, you know, even though we are still in the middle of recovery of tourism, we're seeing it now. People traveling are actually wanting to get out more. Jamaica has always been known as a all-inclusive hotel environment. And whether they're staying in all-inclusives or they're staying in what is now a growing Airbnb and other hotels, people are wanting to get out. They want to go out into nature. There's an appreciation of it. And I think within that there is, and they want the authentic. There's a new drive for getting out and really meeting the people, tasting the food, you know, enjoying the music and of course the nature. So, you know, out of this crisis has come, you know, a whole awakening. And yes, we have to reimagine exactly what we want and how we are going to best position the country coming out of this. And it includes the inclusiveness, you know, of all the other players for the authenticity, the cultural experiences, etc. So there really is an opportunity like I've never seen before in putting and mapping out all these pieces from the point of the travelers understanding what is available in the country and how they can really connect, engage in a more purposeful way, and in doing so, increasing the inclusiveness. And I, you know, just listening to what I was hearing from speakers earlier, the ability to really get the type of funding in place for the entrepreneurs that would be making up many parts of this is a critical role, as well as building the capacity within. So yeah, that would be my take on this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to the first answer that Dr. Connell provided when he spoke about the interdependence, the fact that when COVID hit, it really gave us a good look at the fact that we are not in this by ourselves. It doesn't matter how much money you have, maybe being successful as an entrepreneur, it just didn't matter. Everyone was now vulnerable. And the only way we were able to survive and thrive is when everyone decided, all right, in order for us to do this, we have to do this together. So thank you so very much for that. We need to reimagine and to position, but we also realize that even during this crisis, there is this opportunity. There's the opportunity to improve and innovate and to work in areas that needed a lot of help. Abraham, I'm coming to you. You know, how do you feel that, you know, that COVID-19 has affected Jamaica's ability to achieve the SDGs. These have always been things we're trying to achieve. We always knew the challenges existed before. COVID just exacerbated it. You know, what do you think the effect has been on our ability to achieve these SDGs now?
Thanks, Dr. Reed. I mean, certainly the pandemic is an unprecedented issue across the world. It is testing many of the assumptions we had about how we do business, how we continue with learning, how we do trade, and especially as we are taking that lap towards 2030, 2 years of that has gone into murky waters where all the critical systems linked to health, business, education, and so on were challenged, especially here in Jamaica. It is very easy to see these challenges as setbacks, especially as it relates to the actualization of the SDGs. But Dr. Reed, our young people are saying there's certainly many lessons, many opportunities that we can leverage to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. Mm-hmm. Here in Jamaica, our measures to adjust are largely observed as mitigation techniques, but young people believe, I believe, that the pandemic is a nudge to recognize gaps in our current roadmap and recognize the changes we need are not just in response to the pandemic, but to make Jamaica even more resilient on this last lap towards 2030. I refer more specifically to a broader uptake and mainstreaming of technology and recognizing the benefits of digital citizenship and the role this can play in achieving the SDGs and their targets.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. And listening to the youths at the National Youth Consultative Conference, you know, they're optimistic, even though they acknowledge that there are challenges. We're seeing youth now looking at the gaps. They're looking at their communities. They're looking at the social issues, and they're coming up with apps and coming up with their own programs, and they're coming up with their own ways of how they can be the agents of change. And I think that is something that is really amazing to see, and it's all because of the partnerships. So Dr. Connell, I'm coming back over to you to ask you, you know, from your perspective, how do you think that private sectors can contribute to the achievement of SDGs? There might be those who fully understand the concept, they're already on board, it's a part of their ecosystem and their DNA and their culture. But what about those who are still going, okay, I kind of vaguely understand, but then how can I do this if there's so many, there's 17, do I have to do all? Which one do I start with? How do they contribute in a meaningful manner?
I think this is a fundamental question. Already in 2015, when states got together to endorse the SDGs, there was a common understanding that this level of ambition would not be achievable without a strong implication of the private sector. First, because of the cost. Second, because of the requirements in terms of innovation, because of the energy required. So there was already a broad consensus. And this is why, by the way, there was specific mention of the need for this partnership very early on the discussion around the SDGs. But I think what I would like to see the private sector do is to look at it this way. If you're in the tourism industry and you're thinking tourism all day, if you're in technology, if you're in construction, if you're in the service industry, and you're thinking about these specific industries, areas, clients, activities every day, what the SDG does is it gives you the opportunity to take a break from the very narrow focus, come all together, bring all these people together and look at our collective ambition. Start with that. Let's start with understanding outside your specific area what the collective ambition is. And once you understand why this collective ambition is important, is essential, the interconnectedness, the relevance of this collective ambition, then immediately you begin to see how your daily activities can impact or is impacted by this common goal, these common set of objectives. And in that fora, you start discussing with others some of the value add you could bring to the table in this discussion. You know, now, crisis forces us to think that way. Yes. When we had the COVID, we all had to think about how do we get masks out there? How do we get, in fact, you know, I'm a medical doctor. I've learned more about the pharmaceutical industry in the past year than in 13 years of medical school. I have to say it honestly. So crisis forces us to think immediately about, you know, how do we come together? But we need to learn to do this now outside crisis. And the platform for us to do this is the 10 years of accelerated effort to achieve these goals. Success for us in the next 3 days is that our private sector companies, our private sector partners, civil society organizations, government, international organizations, we sit together around the table, around lunch, and we're asking ourselves, let's try to understand these collective ambition, and then let's see ourselves how we fit and where we fit.
Correct.
And then let's join and link together. And from that, I think you'll have enormous creative ideas. And you said something also that I want to highlight. I'm so impressed in the past year that I've been here by the ambition, the optimism, the innovation, and the creativity of youth.
Yes.
I'm fortunate to work in my own personal environment with a whole bunch of young people. And the decision I've made is for the rest of my life to not work with anybody over 25. No, I'm joking, of course.
Oh my goodness,
Just
completely
I'm joking, of course. I'm joking, of course.
Completely out.
But this is just to say that another important lesson for me over the past 2 years is the wealth of innovation that's out there and the wealth of creativity that's out there in sectors that we don't normally look for or intuitively look for. And what we're trying to do, us, in the context of the UN, is to make sure that we're bringing as much individuals, organizations, partners under the big tent. And then we have a free flow of ideas.
Yes.
Anything is welcomed. There are no bad ideas. Just come, let's sit together, let's understand each other. And the last point I make on this is, I think this is an important point, is the extra effort we have to put in to really understand partners, potential partners, organizations, entities with which we don't necessarily have a direct link.
Yes.
And we don't tend to do that. So this is the time for us to, read up and get a better understanding of what's happening out there in construction, what's happening in sports, what's happening in arts. And somehow, as we get a better understanding of these different areas, we immediately start to see potential areas where we can build together.
Beautiful. Therese Turner-Jones, I'm coming to you. Tell us how the Inter-American Development Bank has sought to engage with civil society and the private sector.
This is a big area for us, not just because civil society is the third leg, right? It's government, labor, it's civil society on the other side. So we typically have a civil society grouping that we consult on our country programs. So this is a group of people who we meet regularly. We talk about challenges in Jamaica. We talk about approaches we can take to get things done. We listen, because I think it's very important, as Gary was saying, to have information coming from many different parts of, lack of a better term, the ecosystem. So these persons represent different aspects of Jamaican society, which are somehow related to the programs we're doing. And so we need to hear from them as to how we're doing as an organization, whether we're meeting our objectives, whether the projects can be tweaked to make them more effective. They were especially helpful at the beginning of COVID when we were trying to strategize around what to do, how to help, and so on. And I think civil society groups can only make us better, can only help us do our jobs better. The IDB and other multilaterals tend to be under scrutiny of civil society, let's call them non-governmental organizations, because they're looking to say, is what you're doing aligned not just with the current government's interests, but are these interests really aligned with the interests of everyone in the country? So I think it's important to have good relationship with a broad cross-section of civil society, which we do have. And to pick up on Gary's point, young people are especially important in this equation. And he mentioned not working with anyone over 25, but I was advised to have a mentor who was 15 years old, right? So Gary, you got to go even younger than that to keep up. I mean, look, can we understand what our kids are writing to us in our text messages with them? I mean, some of the acronyms I can't even figure out. However, I think the point is the future lies with the young people in all of our societies. And not only do we have a lot to learn from them, but I think the important aspect of young people is trying to understand what their expectations are for the future. What is their vision of themselves into the future? So I think that's really important. On the private sector side, well, we have a lot to do with the private sector, Terry, and it mostly has to do with not just financing the private sector in Jamaica through whatever needs that they have, but also making sure that what the private sector does when they do take financing from the IDB is aligned with our vision of improving lives, gender equality, that women are fully represented in some of these corporates, that women are represented on boards. So it's not just about, paying, having a checklist and saying, okay, do I meet one of these 17 SDGs? But it's really going a bit deeper and saying, well, how many women do you employ? How many women are on your management team? What about your board? We know that that's a sticky topic in Jamaica because still too few women are on corporate boards. And by the way, we know from evidence that those businesses that have gender balance on their boards actually have a better rate of return to their stockholders and shareholders. So we know that it's not just a good thing to do, it's actually a profitable thing to do to have gender equality. And of course now at the IDB and also at the UN, when we talk about gender equality, that's one dimension of inclusion. But remember, we have other dimensions of inclusion. You mentioned earlier the disabled and so on, but there's also sexual orientation, there's also religion, there's also a whole raft of things we need to now be thinking about when we talk about inclusion. It's not just about, all right, I've got, let's say in the case of a company in the United States or even in Jamaica, it's not just about having a couple of women here, but it also, what kind of diversity in those women do you have? Are they all straight women? Are there, do you have any gay people on your board? I think this is something, because as we get to human rights and we go deeper into the discussion, no one should be left behind. And I think this is a really important point to make as we talk about partnerships, because for some people, it's such an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a conversation we need to be having all the time, particularly in a country like Jamaica, where we know that there are minority groups that are discriminated against because of where they are. And I think we have to put our big pants on. We have to bring our brains together to figure out how we get everyone at the table, because a Jamaican is a Jamaican, and a Jamaican, no matter what their color, race, creed, sexual orientation is, abilities, they should have a stake in the country and the country's outcome. And I think this is really the role of the UN and organizations like mine to always remind our clients that these are important goals as well. Thank you.
And inclusion, the fact that we're speaking about it more, it's DEI, we see it definitely globally, still in little spaces and little pockets here in Jamaica, but just kind of reminding private sector and civil society as well that we cannot limit DEI based on our own conscious and unconscious biases. It actually requires us to expose ourselves to the very communities that we're trying to help, to understand what their needs are and to have those communities being represented in a meaningful manner. So I'm totally on board where that is concerned. John, I'm coming across to you because my question is, how can we create a partnership enabling ecosystem that basically engages business and philanthropy as partnerships or as partners delivering 2030? So we want to be able to get the business, to have the business, but it needs to engage and marry fully to philanthropy. How do we create that ecosystem?
Right. Well, again, I'll go back to the crisis. We definitely saw that there is more than a willingness by the private sector to step up. We saw $125 million, put into care packages. We had 4,000 tablets that were issued to help with the school. And there's still a lot more that needs to be done to help with the connectivity of the most vulnerable children, especially in an environment where you're not having the face-to-face, etc. Yes. One insight I want to kind of share, because I take note that at the board levels, we may not have as many women, but in the management side of businesses, I know it is predominantly women. And I think one of the most vulnerable right now are the men in Jamaica. You know, the men are not graduating from high schools and universities as a block. And really where I think the private sector can help is in working to see how we can, you know, as one of the largest employers, find ways to map a route for young men to get back within a rhythm of education and where they get jobs. And I say that because it does not help if there's not a fast track pipeline to the jobs. And you know, we have to be careful of, you know, they address discrimination, you know, where people are worried about hiring from certain areas because they you know, they think the area is a bad area, and it kind of causes severe problems in many employers. I mean, employees getting, or potential employees getting into jobs. I've heard too many instances of people using other addresses because they can't use their own address. So I'm in full agreement on the inclusiveness. I think that the private sector can play a very big role. And I think that programs like, there's one particular pilot program right now, which is a semi-military program for the more vulnerable youth to get trained in discipline, in some cases, not in some cases, in all cases, developing certain skills. It's important that the private sector, as a priority, hire these young men and bring them into the workforce. I think what you're saying about the SDGs, I know there's an environmental side too, and I want to commend the Prime Minister on the 3 million trees in 3 years. The private sector is committed to 500,000. I think just the environmental side of what we are looking at, there are ways also for tourism to, in embracing it, to both monitor what is taking place, because when you start to showcase, you will see where you may be weak, but also to incorporate, the more we can incorporate it in a meaningful way, is the more it will be protected and managed as well.
And I think as I hear you speak, I think of balance. I think as we speak about the SDGs, what we're trying to attain, equal rights for all, I think as we try to empower various groups, whether they are vulnerable, existing vulnerable groups, whether they were once vulnerable and they're, you know, getting to another, they're moving into the other chapter or season, that in everything that we do, it should never leave another group disadvantaged. And so if we're empowering one, we should be trying to empower all, so that collectively we can get a lot more done in terms of achieving the SDGs. So I think it's definitely that no one should be left behind and no one should be disadvantaged. Now, Abraham, we just heard John speak about you know, the environmental aspect, and there are many global youth movements, especially with respect to climate change. You know, we see a lot of youngsters leaving classes, saying they're not going to classes, they're picketing, they're making their voices heard with regards to the environment, the world that we are leaving for them, and they're definitely making their voices heard. For young people in Jamaica, what would you identify as the 3 top concerns considering the conclusion of the GGPE's Youth Consultative Conference early this month? And it doesn't have to be limited to the environment, naturally, but what were their top 3 concerns?
Thanks, Terry. So the conference held on October 6 and 7 was really focused on youth perspectives as we build a resilient roadmap for recovery, bringing youth into that discussion. We also mainstream the SDGs into the conversation, but of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic really in the background of everything that's happening, a lot of the youth recommendations were in light of the current pandemic. more so, we have put together a call to action with about 5 points that came out of the consultations on day 1 of the conference. I can share 3 in this platform, but we'll be publishing all 5 for everyone to see. And the GGPE, Governor General's Program for Excellence, will be working with the UN to bring other partners into this discussion as we bring some of these recommendations to light. I think top on the list is young people are saying that we need to make technology an important element of the public education system beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So they're saying government must therefore make provisions for every child to have access to devices at least, and at least intermittent access to the internet. And we know charities and NGOs, civil societies, form pluralistic partners in our development. So young people are saying they can also rally resources to bridge this divide, right? So some young delegates share that the students need have evolved. And so it's virtually impossible to be up to speed, perform research, pursue challenging assignments without access to the kind of technology that they need to even link them to even more resources, right? And then there are the tertiary level students who believe that tertiary institutions have a role to play in preparing the workforce, particularly educators, for this transition. But beyond the pandemic, young people are seeing technology as a larger role to play in the reform of our school system and in preparing our next generation of workers for our global market. Our next point was that we should be promoting responsible and ethical digital citizenship, because whether we want to face it or not, one thing that the pandemic has forced us to do is to become digital citizens. And so many of the delegates have shared that their parents or their educators are not always tech savvy, limiting their ability to supervise their use of the internet-enabled devices, which means that we have a lot of young Jamaicans who have unsupervised access to a world of unfiltered and unethical information and even exposure to harm. But young people are demanding support for their parents and educators so that they have the skills to help them navigate inaccurate information, use the internet and technology safely. More senior students shared their concerns about the flexibility of their school's curriculum, especially at the start of the pandemic, in helping them to decipher and appropriately credit information they receive online. We heard from some people who said when they went online, a lot of the things that they benefited from in the traditional sense were neglected. So you didn't have a time, some students didn't have time to have a one-on-one with their guidance counselor anymore. And you could imagine the implications for students who are in very vulnerable circumstances and are not allowed to leave home. But more importantly, in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, parents can support their children to debunk. I want to insert this as a subline. One thing that we saw coming out in one of the consultative sessions is that young people think they should become empowered to be champions of public health education within their homes, where they come from a lot of families where parents believe so much in education as a source of upward social mobility that they'll trust their children when they come home and say, teacher said, right? So if they're able to be a part of educating parents, not only about vaccines or some of the other current health concerns, but we have non-communicable diseases on the rise in Jamaica, and they can be a part of that too. More structured entities for public health education can use young people, especially the students, to bring the campaign resources home and help their parents with simple guides to debunk fake news. And finally, I would like to share what we're seeing coming out is that young people expect governments, the civil society, all the partners to protect and encourage new pathways to employment, right? So making young people ready for the global market that's not only technology driven, but requires new skills in our modern societies. So those are the outcomes from the YCC.
Thank you. Definitely one thing I remember that stood out for me at that youth consultative conference was a youth leader who said we are ready to be put to work. You know, sometimes our youngsters are unfairly labeled as lazy, and they're not interested, and they don't care, and they're selfish. And we've heard it. We've heard it said about millennials and Gen Zs, and we're not saying that we don't have individuals like that, but you'll find that across any age bracket. But it was the fact that one of the youth leaders said, we have ideas, we have our network, and we are ready to be put to work. And I think what she really said was, do not underestimate our power. We just need the opportunity to be put to work. So I thought it was a fantastic, quite a fantastic conference there. I have a question here on Twitter from Lloyd Walters. Thank you so very much for your question, Sir Lloyd. And the question is for Ms. Turner Jones. How can we foster greater female political participation in Jamaica?
That's such a hard question. It's such a hard question because, let me tell you, we have been working, the IDB has been working across this region. Like generally, if an election is imminent or something like we had in the Bahamas just last month, there was a general election, and the IDB put this workshop together for women who were running in the election, so the candidates, sort of to give them some sense of, you know, what it would entail if you were elected. This is probably, I think, in the Caribbean, one of our biggest challenges, because for some reason, Terry, and you know this from the people you associate with, women don't naturally move to the political arena. And for example, if I take myself as one observation, I could never see myself there, but why not, right? Why don't I see myself there? Because in essence, to be part of the political directorate, you have this notion that you want to improve lives for your citizens. So that's an ambition that obviously I have, you have, most of my women friends have. But to get into the actual work of politics, it requires some skills that I admit I do not have. But I think this has to change. And I think it will change as we expose women to some other tools to how to manage all of those demands that come from being a politician. I don't think it's easy because you're on 24/7.
Yeah.
Your life is no longer private, it's very public. You've got your family, you've got maybe a profession, and you've got the interest in improving the livelihood in your country. So it's a lot to juggle. But having said that, we juggle very well. Women juggle very well. And Jamaica is a fantastic example. We've had a female prime minister here. In my own country, in the Bahamas, we've never had a female prime minister. And I must say, after this recent election, we have so few women who ended up in the cabinet. So I'm disappointed, but you know, it's a small country, but that's what we have. But I think we have to be talking about these things daily, and we have to support those new women who got elected. For example, when I look at what happened in the last general election here in Jamaica, there are lots of first timers, but has anybody put in place a mentoring system for them? And I think there are women organizations that talk about this. I'm involved in at least one or two, and trying to figure out, well, is there something we can do to help support those women? Because I think they do need support. They do need mentoring. They need a firewall of support around them to allow them to put their best ideas forward in an arena that is typically alpha. And you know, I hate to say it, but it's tough. But let's look around the world. There aren't many women leaders, but we know that where they are, New Zealand, for example, you know, one of the best cases of dealing with COVID was because of her leadership. And I think we can go around the world and find other women leaders, but we bring different things to the table as women as leaders. And it's just sad that so many Caribbean countries have too few women politicians. But I feel hopeful because I see this next generation. I heard Ibrahim just talk about this. I think we have a lot to look forward to in the next generation of leaders, because I see young people who have ambition, who have ideas, who are working with technology, who are thinking differently than the way you and I were trained, and Gary, for example, when we were in school, a different way of pedagogy. So the pedagogy of the 21st century is not just memorizing material. It's about unleashing creative potential of our brains, getting people to learn how to collaborate, think critically, solve problems, and not necessarily absorb a lot of detailed information, because now we have artificial intelligence to do that, right? So we have to figure out the best human beings we want to create now. How do we teach them differently? Because, you know, quality education is one of the SDGs. And we know from all kinds of empirical evidence now that we have to transform our curricula to get this kind of result. So I think that's a long answer, but I really look forward to seeing more women in politics. But I think the arena of politics has to change, and it should change, to allow women to be able to participate equally. And for those young women who are there, who got elected in this last election in Jamaica, I say, congratulations to them. Let's find a way to support them and help them succeed.
Correct. I mean, it was a toughie. It is a toughie. It's that type of question. And yes, the answer is long, but I think it's because this is absolutely layered. And it isn't that we want women to get a free pass. It's not that we're saying we want unqualified women, but what we're saying is we want a reimagination of what the system looks like, what the environment looks like, and the ecosystem that will allow them to play just like everybody else. So, I mean, a lot of persons have told me to enter politics. And let me tell you something, I've said, absolutely not. I am not interested, because I find I absolutely have more influence and impact outside of it. Funny enough. So some of us are finding other gateways and other ways of having impact, but there are a lot of external influences that affect the reason why that we don't see more women. But I'm happy to see that we're getting there. Dr. Connell, I have a question from you. Twitter. Oh, Twitter's on fire. What can Jamaica look forward to as key highlights in the upcoming version of the new multi-country sustainable development framework? And why should we all be on board?
Well, thank you for that. In terms of context, and for those that may not be aware, we're in the process right now working closely with the government of Jamaica and private sector and civil society on developing our new country framework, which is basically the business plan that defines the priorities on which the UN will focus on in its relationship with government. Obviously, it's been largely impacted by these two things. First, the experience we've had with COVID, and the need for us to rethink how we work together with different sectors of society to actually achieve results. And the second thing also is our desire to accelerate actions in this decade, decade of actions, to see real success around the SDGs.
And my sense is you'll find it innovative in several ways. First is the layer of consultations that we've had, the input that we've had, the contributions that we've had, the inspiration that we have. It influences our thinking of the document. There's a lot of focus on key interventions that have the potential to be transformative, that are catalyzers. It's more focused because it builds also on the reform process, the multi-country office review, a series of internal processes, and the specific ask of governments in the region for the UN to be much more focused in the areas where they can provide support or accompaniment. The third layer, which I think is going to be quite interesting for all of us, is that it's really results driven. We're committing to a series of results, and of course, our governments are going to hold us to account. I do want to take the opportunity of this question to say one point, and I'm so happy that we have John here on this. You know, often the issue with partnerships is that it requires a certain level of investment, of time, of resources. And a lot of people will say, well, you know, is it really worth it? I remember just a few years ago, a lot of private sector organizations would tell me, Gary, we would love to work with the UN, but the bureaucracy is just, but today, we have so many new instruments. I'm so happy to have Therese here today. If you take a minute to look at what the IEDB is doing with the private sector, it's so incredibly impressive. It's so incredibly innovative. I was talking yesterday to a major partner who was explaining that they have now portfolios that are available to support private sector initiatives. So there's a lot going on out there. And one key takeaway I hope that the audience will have today is just that revisit, if you haven't looked at the international organizations and what they're doing to be able to stimulate partnerships, especially with the private sector, please revisit us. Look at our websites, look at our work, and I'm sure you will find a lot of it interesting. The last thing, and again, John, I hope you'll help us convey this. Give us feedback. Tell us what you want to see more of. Tell us what you would like to see different. Tell us, share with us some of the ideas and options you have so that we can adjust and we can continue to grow and evolve. I'm thinking, in the context of the framework we're developing right now, it's forced us to look beyond our usual elements to find new areas of potential influence or impact. And in that exploration, it's amazing to all of us involved in this process how much unexplored territory we have yet to look for. The orange economy, what does it mean exactly, and what could be our contribution? How could we use our convening authority to bring stakeholders together around that? The blue economy, what does it mean exactly for us here, and how can we tap into different resources? I think the last thing I'll say on this, I've been now in Jamaica for a little over a year. And while the partnership has been really extraordinarily constructive, I'm also very impressed with the amount I'm actually gaining from my experience here. And I'm anxious to actually take back to other middle-income countries that are facing similar circumstances. So the other thing about the partnership and the forum that the UN and the international organizations provide is the opportunity also to share cross-border. So bottom line, challenging times, but exciting times. Yes. And technology now offers us an incredible opportunity, but also certain threats and challenges. And this has been a real incredible experience. And hopefully this is the beginning of a dialogue, a beginning of an exchange that will lead to better results for all of us.
Fantastic answer. So Jaleel Fortis says, so Mr. Balanced, I asked you, what should the development partners do to better engage private sector in planning and implementation of projects and programs? You're on mute.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear it clearly.
That's fine. What should the development partners do better to engage private sector in planning and the implementation of projects and programs, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it really is taking advantage of the fact that we have a renewed focus on the partnerships, mm-hmm. and the development partners can help in structuring sustainable ways that private sector can do the mapping, etc., going forward, as well as providing whatever other financial support that we've heard about that could be accessed. So it's about really sitting at the table and finding the ways that we can map it out and put the type of oversight that the development bodies would help with the clear KPIs to make sure that the continuity is there. Because one of the things that concerns me is that, in this crisis, we have really come together in a very meaningful way. But as business starts to get going, the question is, does that start to diminish? And we really need, understanding that we're in this thing together. We need some structured oversight in the partnership to make sure that it keeps going in the way it needs to go.
That is constant and consistent and proactive and not always reactive and when our backs are against the wall. Mr. Simmons, I have a question here from Akeem Winters, who asks, in what ways can we increase technological literacy in deep rural Jamaican high schools? And what are some of the promising examples that you have seen? And, I really appreciate this question. And the reason why I appreciate the question is because a lot of the times we speak about literacy and the lack of access, but when we really speak about it, we speak about it almost as if it's the Kingston metropolitan area. Not that we do not have communities that are vulnerable, but when we break it down and we literally pull out the rural schools that are even more vulnerable, and I will always pull out my students who are students living with disabilities and require special needs, that's a completely different community. You know, in what ways can we increase the technological literacy and access in deep rural Jamaican high schools? And what are the promising examples, if you have any?
That's a good question. Thanks, Terry. I would open by saying that we need more agencies or bodies that do research to kind of test our assumptions about literacy rates across the country in 2021. I mean, young people, especially, whether or not they have access at school, some do have mobile phones or on social media and are leveraging technology to stay in touch with their peers, to socialize, so on and so forth. I cannot speak to the rate of technological literacy, but as it relates to access, I remember, Terry, you were there when the Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Robert Morgan, the Honorable Robert Morgan, he shared about the willingness of government and even civil society to bring resources into rural communities, but sometimes some things that are needed to bring the resources to action are not already there, right? So you have schools, for example, who don't have proper bathrooms, but then the government might decide to build some bathrooms and then there's no running water, right? In the same way, private sector needs to step up to the table and be more inclined, maybe driven by data, to bring their services, especially internet access, into strong and reliable and good internet access into these areas. If I have examples, not quite, but I know particularly within the Governor General's Program for Excellence, we recently worked with these past students of St. Mary High School who donated over $2.3 million worth of computers to St. Mary High as part of their initiative to bring the school into the digital era, right? Yeah. So there's a lack of resources, but once the resources, the infrastructure arrive, once the resources, the technology-enabled devices arrive, we need internet, we need services, we need proper troubleshoot. I mean, we heard from students in the conference about internet going down on Wednesday and not coming back to the following Wednesday. That's school they've missed out on. So there's a lot to be done in that regard.
No, thank you so very much. I have a question here from Neville Charlton, and I don't know who wants to take it. Certainly you all can chip in. How can young people secure meaningful partnerships, especially within this global pandemic? And I guess we do have a lot of youngsters who might have their initiatives, and that is fine, but perhaps there's a more formal structure. Maybe they have to be registered. I'm not too certain, but the question is, how can young people secure meaningful partnerships, especially within this global pandemic? Who wants to go? Don't you all go at once?
I think that's a good question for Gary. That's a good question for Gary.
He's laughing.
I was hoping, as you would go. I know you're doing a lot on this. I have twin daughters that are 25. And one of the things they've taught me is that information is going to be critical.
Yes.
Please make sure that if you have ideas, you have the energy, you have the will, you need to go out there and make sure you're fully informed. The second thing is, of course, do not be discouraged. When you get at the door of UNICEF, UNDP, UNFPA, and the first person you meet tells you that everybody else is busy, insist. Insist, because you're here for a good cause, you're here to help promote. So you have to be insistent on your need to make sure that you're heard and you're able to contribute. The guarantee that I will give you is that as a UN and as a UN country team, we're not only committed to providing opportunities for youth to partner, to contribute, and to make a difference, we also understand that it's an essential component of our success. So this is really not lip service. There is no future without the implication, the involvement, and the contribution of young people, and especially in a context that's overwhelmingly involving. The general consensus today is that we're not building the future based on our understanding of the past anymore. We're evolving and we're learning as we move forward. And critical to this, of course, is their participation. So please, if you haven't done so, call us, look at our websites, look at what we're doing in other countries, understand how we work and the processes to engage with us, link with civil society organizations that are already our partners, join some of these forums so that you can express yourself, send us feedback. The old approach of just writing us a simple letter, please do continue to do that. And eventually you'll see your contribution will be taken very seriously. At least that would be my contribution. But Therese, I don't know if you want to add something from the IDB perspective.
Those are really good points. I think what's the advantage young people have today, and I'm going to be very clear about this. Obviously, we're talking about young people who have access to the internet because they have connectivity, they have broadband, they have access to devices, mobile devices. Information is at your fingertips. As Gary's saying, if you approach the IDB or you approach the UN about doing a project, do some research on your own beforehand. We have a plethora of information on our websites. There's a lot of documents to plow through, but do a bit of research first. So when you come to me with a question, you've already done some homework, and I've seen that you've exhibited some interest and you know what you're talking about. It's too cheap just to walk into somebody's office or to ask for somebody's time without doing that. It's completely unnecessary today, right? It's sort of be prepared for the next step you want to make. And I just wonder, I like this. I heard Jack Ma respond to a question to him. Jack Ma was the CEO of Alibaba, the biggest, retail online, the equivalent of Amazon in China. And he was asked, so if your kid were to go to university, next year, what would you get them to study? And you know what he said? He would put them into arts, because the skills that our kids need for the future, creativity, collaboration, digital literacy, ability to work with others, foreign languages, this is what you need as your armor to be someone who's going to contribute to not just the economy, but also to development of our region in the future. You need these skills, and you need them yesterday. And whatever you can do to improve those skills, you're going to be making an investment in yourself. And by the way, there are tons of online learning courses. The IDB we have, I think, over 100, we call them MOOCs, massive online training courses. They're free, as well as other universities that have free courses. You can build your skills overnight by taking some of these courses. So I think young people just have to step up to the plate. They need mentoring. They can ask questions, but do some homework first, and we'll be very, very happy to partner with you.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, I think, if there are any youngsters listening as well, do not underestimate yourselves, because a lot of the time, and Dr. Connell said it earlier on in the panel discussion, even as private sector, sometimes we are so tunnel vision and focused on what we have to accomplish, our performances, our industry, that we really don't know what's happening in the trenches or in other industries. And so if you can bring a perspective that maybe they are not even looking from, and you can come with your preparation, we're not saying you have to bring all stats and facts, because we understand you may not have all the resources, but to at least show where you're coming from, then certainly I don't think you'll ever be turned away. And you can also screen grab this panel discussion where Dr. Gary Connell is on record saying, don't give up, tell them you insist, and you're not leaving. I'm just saying that will work as well. So this conversation has been so rich. And I do have a final question here as we wrap up. And Olaf de Groot says, growing from Abraham's response, naturally, and his example of St. Mary's High School's alumni donating $2 million for in technology for everyone, what can the Jamaican diaspora do to play an even greater role in development? I mean, just like the youngsters, they are clamoring to help. They've always said it. They want to know how they can help, where they can partner. Where do opportunities exist for them to engage? And is there a formal channel or funnel that they need to go through?
Well, let me just quickly say that the Jamaican diaspora is already doing enormous work. Through their remittances, it's over 2.5 billion. I remember reading recently a study says that diaspora giving in general is close to 4 billion, with a potential of about 1.5, untapped potential of about 1.5 billion more. They are, the Jamaican diaspora are, highly educated, a key component of what I call the middle class that's external to the country. So you're completely right. The potential of the diaspora to come back and contribute is humongous. I think the government has understood that. They've set up systems to be able to reach out to the diaspora in a but you are right in saying that we have to find ways that we can use that energy in the development sphere. And Jamaica is not the only country looking into ways of doing that. There are several models, several instruments, several ways to approach it. Some have been successful, some have been less successful, but it's definitely something that we need to explore intensively. How do we really get engaged diaspora so that they can continue to support development more specifically? Yes. And we're actually right now as the UN looking into some of these ways with several partners. That will require, again, private sector. It certainly will require government. It will require civil society. It will require instruments that provide a certain level of transparency and credibility, because what the diaspora usually will ask for is we want to be sure that the contributions we're making are being used effectively and efficiently.
And they manifest, yes.
They want also some visibility and credibility for the contribution they're giving. They want us to make an optimal use of their time and contribution. So there is a setup that's necessary to involve and engage the diaspora effectively. But there are very good models up there that had worked extremely well. I'm thinking about Mexico. I'm thinking about so many examples that I think we can tap into. This is a critical question, and I think can be, by the way, a strategic turning point to really part of these accelerators for the next 10 years with an impact potential that's quite significant.
Yes. Anyone wants to add to that in terms of the Jamaican diaspora being more involved?
I mean, I think just to add to Gary, I'm always impressed at how much attention is given to the diaspora in Jamaica. Regular conferences. It seems like the Jamaican government and Jamaican people want to get more from the diaspora. But I think this is a complex topic. It's not just about the remittances, because clearly that's a huge safety valve. Remittances outnumber the foreign receipts from tourism, if you can believe that, on an annual basis in GDP terms. So that's just to put it in the scale of how important Jamaicans living abroad are to the economy here and also to their families, obviously. I think the question always is, because a country that's developing needs new ideas, new ways of working, needs skills, needs all those famous people who are working around the world who are Jamaican, who've been making contributions all over the world. How do we tap into their expertise to borrow some of that expertise and have it translated into real changes in Jamaica? And that's always complicated, because once you've set your life somewhere else, it's hard to be in two places at the same time. But I want to say, I've talked to so many people I know living abroad who are Jamaican or Caribbean or whatever, and they do lots of missions to their home countries, whether in the medical field, and this, Terry, in the dental field, in all kinds of fields. Teachers come back and want to offer their services. I think that's fabulous. But I think, as Gary was saying, and this has been a conundrum that as economists we've been thinking about for years and not solve it. How do you harness that $2 billion into something that you can say goes into more productive activity, right? We know that $2 billion fuels a lot of consumption, but how do we get that money invested? And again, it's tricky, because you're talking about savings that my relatives have accumulated and they're sending to me. So why should I siphon off 10% to put into some savings account or some bond? So, it's tricky issues. But I think Jamaica should be proud of its diaspora and what already happens. The question is, how can we, make that relationship even better?
Absolutely. I have two final questions to bring in Abraham as well as John. John, I'll leaving you for last. Ibrahim, you do a lot of work with youngsters. We're always hearing about brain drain, which is a real thing, where we get amazing youngsters who are talented. Maybe they got a grant, maybe they got scholarships, you know, valedictorians. They really tear up school and they're retained elsewhere. There are some that want to come back, they want to do more, but because of, you know, either unemployment or maybe payment issues, they just don't come back home. How can we retain our talent? Or even in the YCC, did some of the youngsters actually state what are some of the things they need in order to stay here, the incentives?
I think that's a very big question for me, but it wasn't really one of the themes explored in the conference. But I think I would be dragged on Twitter for not reiterating that it's the pay is where most people start. I mean, as a young person, you go through, a lot of us coming from very humble beginnings, you go to school, you have loans to pay, you have a lot happening, and you have relocation costs. I mean, you come from a rural community, moving to where work is in Kingston, and you can hardly pay rent. You can hardly live comfortably. But I think beyond the pay, I cannot speak to what the metrics are to decide how people are paid by government or private sector. But beyond the pay, people want some kind of, young people want protection. If it is that the pay is not going to be great, how can you incentivize housing or incentivize them in ways that make them better at what they do, expanding their skills, more grants to expand their skills and to be further qualified to support here in our own country. But I think also the conversation kept coming up about nurturing the talents in modern skills that are required here. Yes. You work in a setting as a young person, and there's a graphic designer, and there's no priority for the work that the graphic designer does. That is reflected in their pay, that's reflected in the outputs within the company, they're consulted the least. But more jobs need to be created for these people, because if you think about it, in the developed countries, they're recruiting our engineers or software engineers, they're recruiting our IT experts and our doctors and nurses. And if it is that we don't make them feel like we need them and create opportunities for them and protect then they'll leave.
Thank you. And John, I have this question for you. And boy, I think it's a tough one. And I almost feel bad asking it, but because everything we want to accomplish in Jamaica, people say, all right, private sector, you need to do more, you need to do more, you need to do more. As we speak about trying to achieve these sustainable development goals and hopefully get this vision 2030 that all Jamaicans and members of the diaspora, the globe really wants to achieve, we know that one of our biggest challenges, development challenges, is crime and violence. We know this. I mean, we have all sorts of inequalities in different areas, but we understand that our vulnerability lies because crime and violence is just so big and far-reaching. What role can or should the private sector play to try to address this in trying to achieve the SDGs? No pressure, no pressure. You're muted. You're muted, John.
Sorry.
Yeah,
already, thank you. Already the private sector does, there is a PSOJ-led initiative for the collaborative oversight with the targets with the Ministry of National Security. And there's also the UN collaboration on disarmament. Yes. And those are very meaningful initiatives. Separate and apart from that, I'm sorry, the Deputy Prime Minister is not here now, but the Deputy Prime Minister has been doing a program in Montego Bay, which I spoke to earlier, which is taking children from the most vulnerable communities and going through a program of basically re-socializing Many of these children feel disenfranchised. They feel like there's a we and them. And,
Yes.
you know, in partnering with a program like that can have real meaningful benefits. One, I heard you talking about the, you know, how do you keep young people committed? Well, they want a career path. They want to see what's the way forward. In that, the diaspora and everybody else, you know, we need more examples of what hard work, grit, and commitment, where it can take you. But it also, you need to be mapping for some of these children that aren't seeing the path, exactly how to get there. And you know, the private sector can play a meaningful role in doing this. One, in hiring a lot of these, it's not just children, young men, young women, when they get trained. The fact is that whether the training is the specific area you want, they're going to come out more disciplined, more structured, you know, having a rhythm, which is very, very important, and a way of carrying yourself, which is more professional. And it's going to be up to the private sector to make sure that when those children, when those young professionals, you know, graduate from these schools, that we make sure that we are hiring from you know, from those graduates, whether they are specifically trained in areas that we want or not, they would have gone through a training program. And I think that's going to be a very important part. But at the end of the day, the crime and violence is never going to, it can't be just the government, it can't just be the private sector. It really is the sort of thing that requires us coming together in a collaborative way and finding social interventions and other programs that we can do, and giving examples of where people can go if they commit to these programs.
Absolutely. We all have the responsibility. We all have individual responsibility. And if we take responsibility, it goes outwards to our communities and to the nation on a whole. Thank you. Thank you so very much, John. And congratulations, even as you represent the private sector organization, that, you know, we always know that there's always more. And there'll always be people who say we're not doing enough. But we really always have to take the opportunity to pause or to stop and to say thank you for the work that is being done, because it will definitely be the foundation for much more that is to come. So we know incrementally we'll do very well over the years. Dr. Gary Connell, UN Resident Coordinator, Ms. Therese Turner-Jones, Country Representative for Jamaica and General Manager, Caribbean Country Group, IDB, Mr. John Biles, Vice President, PSOJ, Mr. Abraham Simmons, National Program Coordinator, GGPE, and Health Informatics Specialist. Thank you so very much. This is the kind of conversation that we could go on and on and on, but we know that we have to get our attendees off to their lunch break, and we want to take the opportunity to thank our attendees, because the questions, the type of questions that you posed really challenged us to speak about even other areas outside of what we intended to speak about as well. So thank you. We like the engagement. We will see you at 1:30. Go, stretch, get up. We don't want you in front of the screen for too long. Go and eat, throw some water on your face, but make sure that you come back, because we go into our very second session. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge Denku Wedderburn as well as Antoinette Tony Aiken, who are our sign language interpreters. Thank you so very much for all of the work, because this is a part of what inclusion looks like. And the United Nations always wants to be the example that we cannot speak about equity and diversity and inclusion if we are not practicing it. So again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you again, Dr. Connell. We look forward to seeing you at 1:30, where we start our second session. Please be safe. Take care.
Thank you.
In Jamaica, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, in collaboration with the Jamaica 4-H clubs, is supporting 12 schools to rehabilitate their school gardens. Under the Homegrown School Feeding Program, school meal programs have been linked to local food production. Schools under the program are benefiting from a range of irrigation and production kits and technical guidance to maintain their school gardens. These gardens are a source of fresh fruits and vegetables that help to meet the food and nutrition needs of students. Since the onset of COVID-19, as many schools have remained closed and students have not benefited from the provision of school meals, schools like Newell High School in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica, continue to ensure that their school gardens remain active and can provide students and communities with much-needed local produce. FAO and the Jamaica 4-H clubs are helping some of these schools to ensure that students and community members remain food secure and are able to access locally grown food to promote healthier diets. By rehabilitating and maintaining school gardens, we are helping to create a more inclusive and resilient agri-food system so that we can have better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life for all.
My name is Audrey Ellington, principal of the Newell High School in Southwest St. Elizabeth, Jamaica. In our school garden, we grow mainly vegetables. We have callaloo, corn, pak choy, sweet pepper, hot pepper. We also do escallion, and at times we do cabbage and beetroot. Before COVID, for our school garden, the students would have gotten the chickens to eat. At one time, we also had layers, and so that assisted in our breakfast program, where we usually produce breakfast in the mornings for our students. And on the farm, we also have plantain, and so the plantain was also used for our breakfast program. Since COVID, we have scaled down because the students are not here. But whatever we produce now, community members would purchase, and when teachers come in from time to time, they would also purchase these things. We have not put in back any chickens since COVID, except for when we had students coming back for SBA, then we had to do a batch of birds. And of course, we sold those to community members. But before that, last Christmas, December, we also did packages for our students, and so they also got chickens and whatever else we had on the farm at that time. So whatever we earned, as much as is possible, we used it back on the farm, and some goes into our cash reserve. So with the support from FAO and 4-H under the homegrown agricultural program, we have benefited from a 1,000-gallon black drum and fittings and drip hose. This has helped us immensely because where we are located in Southwest St. Elizabeth, it is rather on the dry plains of St. Elizabeth. So you came this afternoon, we got rains, and we're grateful for that. But under the normal circumstances, the times are very dry and hot. And so with the assistance where we can just fill our drum, turn it on to water when we want to, when we have our seedlings planted, it will ensure that we have vegetables at all times. Our students are from the lower socioeconomic families, and they usually depend on us for food. 5 days per week, we usually cook for them. And we know that if we have it from our farm, we can take it to them. We know where to find them.